Death of the 21st century.
I tell people, I used to say after the age of 40, now it's like after the age of 10, you know, what you do determines how you want to die. You know, you with type 2 diabetes, you may not have known this, but you were making choices that said, I'd like to have some amputations, I'd like to have my kidneys fail, I'd like to go blind, you know, I'd like to have peripheral neuropathy, and then I'd like to die.
Wow, that hit me like a hammer in the chest as I sat there and took it all in. Yeah, I'm the fat one on the left. I reflected on my life. I never thought in a million years I would end up in this position. 120 pounds overweight, out of control type 2 diabetes, heart attack, severe neuropathy in my feet. I burned them in a bonfire and didn't even feel it. Numbness spreading to my hands and joints, blurring vision, borderline kidney disease, ED. Yeah, I'm the only one that will actually admit to being part of Viagra's $2 billion market share. It'd be funny if it wasn't true. Then there's brain fog, and worst of all, anxiety and crippling depression. I'm John McMahon, and this is my real-life story. It's raw and it's real because I want to get real about my health and thriving again. I want the same for you too, and I had to get it out to you as soon as possible. I have diabetes and I'm morbidly obese. I'm 120 pounds overweight, and I've seen the decline of my health rapidly accelerating. I already had one heart attack and my triglycerides were almost 900. Yes, that's very, very bad. I wasn't even sure if I could make it through this documentary with all this on my shoulders. You know, 50% of us in the United States have diabetes or prediabetes, and 70% of you don't even know it. This is a very serious epidemic. For you and your children and the ones you love, please listen to every word you're about to hear in this series.
Diabetes is one of the most rapidly growing diseases in human history.
This now dominates the entire landscape of medicine in the West.
So there's multiple types of diabetes. There's type 1 diabetes, there's pre-diabetes, there's type 2 diabetes, and there's gestational diabetes. Now, majority of people are suffering from pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes.
Diabetes shows up in all the organ systems. It leads to clogged arteries, which contribute to heart attacks and strokes. It injures the nerves, giving people neuropathy. It depresses the immune system, so people with diabetes get infections all over their body, from their skin to their urinary tracts. It's an equal opportunity curse for all the organ systems and people of all nationalities. And we are seeing this, especially in the ethnic groups in our nation as well.
Today we're talking about diabetes. I mean, diabetes is a pandemic now. In fact, that may be why, for the first time ever in recent history, is life expectancy here in the United States actually taking a turn. Actually, we're going to have the first generation of children that lives shorter lives than their parents. And that's primarily due to obesity and the subsequent diabetes epidemic.
Diabetes is such a prevalent disease today. More and more people are coming down with it. We used to think it was just something that people got as they got older. But now we're starting to see more and more young people who have the type of diabetes that we only expect old people to get, which is type 2 diabetes.
You know, the average American maybe dies at age 80 and the average diabetic may die at age 70, but they suffer for 20 years before they die.
Today, though, we have an epidemic. In 1986, there wasn't a single state in the United States that more than 14% of the population was obese. Today, 71% of the population in the United States are overweight or obese. By any definition, it is an epidemic.
Back then, I didn't know why I was feeling depressed, why I was having these almost blackout episodes, why was my blood sugar all over the place. If I had continued on that path, I would have been diagnosed officially with type 2 diabetes. I would have been put on insulin, and I would have continued to be, obese, diabetic. I would have developed, heart conditions, cancer risk increases with diabetes, and so on. I was going down that path.
People think of diabetes and they don't really understand 90% of diabetes is type 2 diabetes.
The tsunami of obesity has been accompanied by a tsunami of diabetes as well. And now the statistics are shocking. They're eye-watering to consider that every other person in this nation is now obese or overweight. And the majority of those people, we're talking about millions and millions and millions of people becoming type 2 diabetic.
I was touched by diabetes at a very young age because I remember at about 4 years old visiting my great-grandmother in the nursing home after she got both of her legs amputated because of diabetes. So it was real to me as a young child. My grandmother had diabetes. I remember her injecting her belly every morning with insulin. And I didn't really know what the disease was. All I remember is if she got too dizzy, she'd have to eat a Hershey bar. And I thought as a little kid, I'm like, this is cool, you get to carry Hershey bars. I didn't understand what it was and how serious it was. And since then, my brother has died of complications of diabetes. And like you say, it's not an epidemic, it's pandemic.
The best known epidemic that turned into a pandemic was the Black Death in the 14th century. So in the 1300s, the bubonic plague swept round through Europe. That plague killed about 50% of the population of Europe. It was a catastrophe. It took approximately 100 years to recover from the catastrophe, and all sorts of villages and communities were completely wiped out. When we start to look at diabetes, we can see that there are some resonances with this plague. Diabetes could really be thought of as the Black Death of the 21st century.
As Dr. David Matthews compared diabetes to the epidemic of the Black Plague in the Middle Ages, and at first thought, wait a minute, how could that be? Well, if you add up the bodies, the diabetes epidemic is going to be far worse.
This journey began for me at my doctor's office, getting a physical before starting on this adventure. The doctor came back, "John, you need further tests. There's an issue on your EKG. I'm sending you to a cardiologist. Have you had an event?" "An event? What are you talking about, event? What's an event? You mean like a heart attack?" "Yes, a minor heart attack." "What's a minor heart attack?" "One that you live through." A follow-up appointment with my cardiologist had confirmed it. How could I have had a heart attack and not know it? That alarmed me. I was advised not to do this project. I ignored the warning. Instead, I went home and jumped on the internet and learned everything I could about this diabetic silent heart attack thing. I was overwhelmed with all the information on what was being called an epidemic of obesity and diabetes. That's when I discovered Dr. Matthews' paper comparing it to the Black Death of the 21st century. He was in Oxford, England. I was in Pismo Beach, California, but lucky for me, he was attending the 77th Annual American Diabetes Association Scientific Conference. That conference was in San Diego, California, just a 5-hour drive away. But I only had 2 days to figure out how to get in, and I was no scientist. I felt something deep inside calling me to set everything in my life aside, figure out a way to get this documentary done, and get it out to you as soon as possible. I managed to get a media pass from a gracious press relations person that returned my email on a Friday night. I was in, and Sunday, I was sitting down with Dr. David Matthews. I thanked Dr. David Matthews and headed home. This pandemic was real. Later in my journey, I would hear other doctors, scientists, and experts confirm what he was saying and get the answers to the questions. Just how serious is it? What are the complications? And exactly who is at risk?
In our society, everybody is at risk of type 2 diabetes. So it's not a question of saying, I can forget about these things, it doesn't matter what I eat. The reality is that everybody is at some risk.
If you think for a second, oh, good thing I don't have diabetes, good thing I don't even have pre-diabetes, think again, because the vast majority of us already have, I'm talking about 80% plus of the American public, have right now an insulin resistant scenario where their body, their pancreas, has to produce a tremendous amount of insulin just to try to keep blood sugars semi-normal. But even then, we're not doing a very good job at controlling blood sugars, because if we're over 40 years of age, between the ages of 40 and 59, 1 out of 2 of us already at least have pre-diabetes. If we're between the ages of 60 and 74, 1 out of 3 of us already have at least pre-diabetes. And if we're 75 years of age or older, we're talking about 75% of us have at least pre-diabetes. In other words, for everybody watching this video series, whether they're young or old, chances are that at some part in their life, they're going to be pre-diabetic, moving aggressively into diabetes. And that very thing is what's driving the Alzheimer's epidemic.
The risks of being significantly overweight, so having, say, a body mass index that goes from normal up to 35. So what does 35 as a body mass index looks like? It looks sort of, you'd spot someone with a body mass index of 35 in the street, and so they're looking sort of overweight. What are their risks? Have they gone up 1.2, 1.4? No, they've gone up 37 times. 37 times. So it's not this little 1.15, da-da-da-da. It's 37 times. The risks are massive associated with obesity.
In the early 1970s, diabetes was a disease we would see occasionally, but it had not attained the gargantuan proportions that it now stalks the American medical countryside with such ferocity. In the 45 years I've been in medical practice, I have watched America become obese at a stunning rate.
Okay, here's the thing. This skinny people think they're okay. They're not. They have fatty liver. They're the ones that have the fattiest liver and fattiest pancreases.
They don't know it.
So I want to make the point that this is not an obesity condition.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to.
Yeah. It's like, because, the skinny people that have diabetes, they just have fattier livers. In some degrees, some respects, they're actually a greater danger.
40% of the normal weight population have the exact same diseases as do the obese. Normal weight people get type 2 diabetes, hypertension, lipid problems, heart disease, cancer, and dementia too. Now, they get it at a lower rate. Agreed. 40% versus 80%. No argument. Obesity is a risk factor. No argument. I agree.
Somebody comes in and they say, like, oh, how can I be diabetic because I'm thin? I'm like, well, 20% of diabetics are thin.
We've got all these medical advances. We have all of this that has brought into an expectation that we live longer and longer, and we have. You look at life expectancy for America, it's gotten longer and longer each generation. But the specialists are looking at it now and saying, this is going to be the first generation that's not going to have this life expectancy of their parents. It's going to be a lower life expectancy, which is really sad. And the attitudes, no one realizes the danger.
In fact, diabetics, your heart disease risk is as high as people who've already had a heart attack.
So if you've got something serious going on, you've got diabetes, maybe you're already starting to have the neuropathies, your sugar's been up for a long time, that insulin is just hurting you in ways that you don't even know. You can be just primed for dropping dead of a heart attack like my parents did. They didn't know. They just died. My sister developed lymphoma as a result of this.
It's so tragic because it's not just people dying younger, it's people suffering tremendously while they're living. That's the saddest part. If you can be dead, but it's worth, if you had kidney failure, on dialysis, or in a nursing home and can't move your body, or you're blind, or you have your legs amputated, it's not a high quality of life.
My life certainly was not high quality now. Driving home from San Diego that day, I couldn't get 3 things out of my mind. 1, I thought of something my friend Michael Skye had said. He works with people in crisis, at times in a relationship when the harder you try, the worse it gets. He had some insight into when you're trying to solve a problem and it just keeps getting worse. I reflected back to my conversation with Dr. Matthews about people not understanding the cause of the Black Plague, and so it just kept spreading. Could that be what's going on here? We're going to look into that in the next several episodes. You won't want to miss them. The second thing that I couldn't shake was my buddy Larry and my sister, who was an RN. They told me in the past that they knew doctors who are reversing diabetes with nutrition alone. Naturally, I'd expected to see some of them at this conference, but I didn't. And that was the third thing that kept bugging me. No one was talking about reversing diabetes. All of the language was just about managing it, living with it. There was a book there that was the size of a phone book containing this year's scientific studies going on around the world, and I couldn't see anything talking about curing it or reversing the complications of diabetes. I'd expected to see something. No one was talking about reversing, just managing. So I called my buddy, who had just won a serious battle with cancer, and my sister. They both said, "John, there are some doctors you need to meet." And the introductions began. I interviewed many doctors and survivors, and you'll meet them all later in our series. But it was the words of Pastor Sneed that really shook me.
For me, my journey really begins years back as a pastor. One of our unfortunate duties that we do is funerals. And I have done plenty of funerals in my life, way too many. And a couple of years ago, starting back, I really began to become annoyed with them, really feeling terrible about, how it works. You're consoling this family, your arm around them, and you're patting them on the back, and you're trying to bring some relief to them. And I'm sitting there looking at this woman that's grieving the loss of her husband, and he's 50 years old, 54, 55. I have done many, many funerals of people under the age of 60, and they were all lifestyle related, nearly every one of them. That's where it started for me. It was really getting tired of going to funerals, seeing people die of early death, hearing the same stories. I mean, today I hear it constantly, over and over. When someone's in their late 40s, early 50s, it's like common language now. I got diabetes. It's just everywhere. Everyone has diabetes. And I can almost immediately, when they come into my office, I don't even have to guess. I just ask, what's your problem? And I know it's going to be obesity, type 2 diabetes, and hypertension. And so for me, that's where my journey began, that passion of trying to shed some light on the topic for them.
He's burying 50-year-olds for a living. I'm 53. After hearing Pastor Sneed, I knew it was time for a change. I knew I had to start with myself. I decided to seek out a hero of mine for some inspiration. Retired Navy SEAL Commander Mark Devine.
There's so many systems that are out of whack that just reflect the collective outer body being out of balance, being diabetic, so to speak. Whereas the individual body is physically out of whack and out of, in this diabetic state because of the lifetime of, poor decision making or just, lack of information and lack of example. So the more individuals who begin to get back on track and take control of their lives, then it's going to slowly turn the systemic ship around at a cultural level.
And it's
or
a call
society.
to action to do that.
Absolutely.
We're calling people to action.
Yeah, exactly. You can't wait for the doctor or for the government to solve it for you. That just perpetuates the problem. Yeah. They're all locked into the same mindset. Good intentioned people, but they're locked into the same dysfunctional mindset that says, oh, diabetes is normal, and take this drug for the rest of your life, and you'll have at least some semblance of a quality of life. That's not good enough for the warrior. Right now, the warrior needs to step up and take responsibility to right the ship, to get themselves back into balance, to be able to move, to breathe, to think, right? To get emotionally strong, to make better decisions for themselves and their families so they can serve more boldly. And then, like I said, what your mission is, if we can get, millions of people to think this way, then we don't need government to solve our problems. No. The trillions of dollars we're spending on healthcare will then be a drop, will go.
I dreamt of joining him one day in those Navy SEAL type operator workouts, but I knew there was no way I could do that right now. I can't even walk up a flight of stairs without breathing heavy. I went home, set a goal for losing my weight, and started working out on the beach. Then, just as I was about to launch my nationwide interview journey for this adventure, something terrible happened. But now I want you to hear Deborah's story of heartbreak and hope.
My mother pretty much would lock herself in the bedroom almost every single day, and with her crossword puzzles and her candy. And my mother at that time probably weighed maybe 250 pounds, and she's like 5'6". So definitely obese. Her first symptoms were her legs, no circulation down in her legs and her feet, like living on pain pills. And then it got where she had serious glaucoma, and she was considered blind already before she was even 50. She couldn't even drive anymore. And then it just progressed to she was having surgeries on her eyes like every couple of months. It seems like the pressure in her eyes was her biggest issue. And then she became an addict to pain pills. And then, of course, it was insulin shots, She told me that she's one of 8 kids. Both of her parents died of diabetes, and all 7 of her brothers and sisters died of diabetes. And she says, it's in our genes, and you are going to die of it. She goes, no matter what you think you're doing over here with all this stuff you're doing, you are going to die of diabetes. But yeah, my mother, I think she was so depressed and gave up hope. I think they were going to amputate one of her legs, and she said, I will die first before they will amputate one of my legs. And they kept saying, Laverne, we need to do this. We really need to. And then she kept taking more pain pills, and she took a whole bottle of them, and I guess the water retention got water on her lungs and her heart, and they just couldn't get the water off of her. And they sent her to rehab to help her process through this. And she turned to my little sister, she goes, I will never walk out of here. And my little sister goes, but Mom, you can, that you're here for rehab. You just got to work. You got to do your part. She goes, nope, I'm never walking out of here. And she goes, if I have to give up my lifestyle, my candy bars, then I just don't want to live. And she was in rehab 3 days, and she died. She felt it was her destiny. She swore to me it was my destiny. And why do you scream? Why do you think you're any different than us? Do you think, why would you be spared?
Diabetes.
Right. Why would you be spared? Do you think you're something better than us? And I was like, no, I'm just going to do my research and do my discipline and find out how to stop this. I don't want to just agree to give in to that.
And you did.
I did. I was like, there's no way. There is no way I'm dying of diabetes.
Wow, that's pretty heavy. Deborah lost her mom after years of trying to find a way to help her. And Deborah now, she has already outlived her mom by years, and Deborah never got diabetes. You're going to want to hear more of what Deborah shares later in this docuseries about how she was able to break with her genes and her environment. She is a remarkable woman, and we'll get to know her. Now, if you're watching this and you're overweight or diabetic, and you can relate to Deborah's mom, perhaps more than even Deborah, and you doubt that you can actually turn your situation around, I want you to know you're not alone. See, I could relate 100% to what Deborah's mom was going through, the locking herself in the room to eat, the shame, the depression, all of it, not being able to get out. This next clip I wanted to share with you was not originally going to be part of the interview. It was when Deborah started to question me, but I have to share it with you.
And every single year she goes, did you have glaucoma yet? And I went, I'm not going to ever have glaucoma, Mom. I'm not going to ever get it. And it was like she was disappointed that I didn't get it. I don't understand it. Maybe you do more than I do. That's one part I would like to understand.
I understand.
That would mean something to me if I did understand that.
I totally understand.
Maybe you can share. That would mean a lot to me. Because I didn't. It was really, really painful to just see her give up and give in and not even try at all. And especially when she had me right there that loved her and would support her, and I would do anything. I would have cooked for her, would have done anything for her to have felt better. When I knew, I learned that it was lifestyle. It was 100% lifestyle that could have stopped it. Because look at me, I didn't get it.
It's like telling a drug addict that it's just their lifestyle. All they've got to change is their lifestyle. That's what it looks like from the outside, from people that are not really deep into the addiction of sugar or food or salt or fat or whatever it is.
Have you ever told this story before?
No, I haven't told anybody.
I feel so honored.
All right. So, I get your mom. I get the core of kind of where, I can't say I felt I can't get what you're saying about your mom. I can resonate with some of that. So I can tell you from my perspective what it meant. And like when she'd lock herself in the door.
Every day.
And she'd react with a lot of anger about even you not saying anything and feeling judged. So it's a combination of feeling trapped, especially your mom with 7 brothers and sisters, into a destiny, right?
Right.
And the behavior is not just, from the outside, people are just saying, well, don't you love yourself? Don't you care for yourself? Don't you have any self-respect? All you got to do, it'd be so great. All you have to do is just change your lifestyle. It's just, can you be addicted to food? Can you be addicted to fast food or
yes.
to candy bars? Because when she's talking about candy bars, you see, like going to the gas station. I can, to be honest, I can relate. Every time I stop for gas, it's almost impossible for me. I say not impossible. It's 80 or 90% of the time. I'm going to go in and I'm going to get some candy bars, okay, or some potato chips or something like that. 80% of the time, it's an interesting thing to stop at that little place with gas. There's a weird association with that. I don't understand it, but when you said that, I got it. I'm telling you, I get that. And then and I'll tell you another thing. If she's watching you be healthy and start to beat it, she sees that.
Probably makes her feel worse. Oh, God. That's what I felt, that I was making her feel worse.
Control this, if she feels like it, or it is overwhelming. I mean, now I'm learning our modern environment. It's like everywhere you can't go 3 steps without the assault of colors and sound and noise and food and the smells and the taste
overstimulation
and the stimulation of everything, and I guess I'm understanding there are some genetic propensities, to that or whatever. But once you develop a taste for it,
and now you understand the chemistry of why the food is an addict. It sounds like
I'll tell you right now, I still even go through now doing this documentary. I have in my quiet times thoughts of, maybe I can't do it. I can't make it. I'm not strong enough. There's statistics. There's got to be some people that don't make it. I'm probably in that. Maybe I'm in that lot because I keep doing the stupidest things, like last night with my feet. And maybe it's just my personality. Maybe it's just my wiring. Maybe I'm one of the people that can't turn it around. So I'm sure your mom mom felt that.
She gave up. I pray you don't.
No, I'm still fighting. So. But I know the thought. I know the moments, right? So I can see that if she had one of those moments, she didn't come back. She just stayed there. So you don't just get diabetes and go walk into a doctor and say, "Oh man, you caught diabetes." Right now.
You've been there.
You've been cooking in diabetes for 20 years. And it was like John said last night, you're John Wang, Dr. Wang, the emergency room doctor that sent me to the emergency room. He says, by the time you got diagnosed, it's like it's like a heart attack. You've already had a heart attack. You've been damaging yourself for 20 years. So.
And so your intention of the documentary is to?
Well, to turn it around, to transform it, to show, hey, I really, really struggle with it, with turning it around. And I've got to lose 120 pounds, and in a healthy way, not an unhealthy way.
Right.
And can I reverse the neuropathy? Can I reverse some of the damage? I don't know. I hope. There's hope, some hope. The more damage I do, the less hope there is. So if I can do it, what inspired me was the vision of somebody making a change, just like you talked about.
Yeah.
So if there was just one person, here's where I find the strength. When I think of the one person that might be affected by this documentary, that would get up off the couch, turn off the TV or the computer, except if they're watching this documentary. Go outside and walk around the block.
Yeah.
Or go walk into your porch. Go walk to your mailbox. Walk out to your car. Just whatever you can do, just get up.
Yeah. One step, one day at a time.
And then ask for help.
Yes.
And then just start. So, because if somebody can watch me do it, and I'm struggling really hard, and I'm a long way down the road of the disease path, maybe they can say, hey, or one of the people I interview, people may hear the story of your mother. She gave up. They may be right there and say, whoa, wait a minute. That's how I made my daughter feel? Or my son? Or so they may choose to live. So if someone chooses, one person chooses to live from doing this, somehow that I'm finding a tremendous amount of strength to fight this battle. So I think that's where my strength is coming from. And I draw on that.
Thank you.
So, that's it. So thank you. Your story's helping me as I'm connecting with people like you, and practitioners like you, and other doctors and people, trying to get the word out. It's a real privilege.
I feel honored to support you in any way I can.
Having to watch her mother slowly die from diabetes is a tragedy. Deborah found the strength of will to reject her so-called destiny with diabetes. In this series, you'll find out how she did it and how you can too. Reflecting back again on my journey, the more I interviewed the experts and survivors for this docu-series, the more determined I became to get the word out. 4th of July came, and I thought, hey, I'll take a break from planning this docu-series and go to the beach. Talk to some folks celebrating the 4th and ask them about their health and fitness. Of course, the food carnival was out there with all the usual suspects. Later that day, I was thinking about my sobering conversation with Dr. Matthews. I couldn't escape the thought, there's a tidal wave coming for these folks. Let's hear from more survivors like Elizabeth, who broke free from her family destiny just like Deborah. If they can, so can you. So can I. And we'll hear from Robbie too. He thrives as a type 1 diabetic. And some words of hope from our doctors.
My father developed diabetes in his 40s. And I remember as a kid, I overheard my parents talking. My mother was very upset because I believe Daddy blacked out very quick, for a very short moment on the highway. And they found out that he had diabetes type 2. And, you know, we didn't know a whole lot about that. My daddy was always overweight, always struggling with that.
I've been living with type 1 diabetes for over 17 years. The personal experience that I have had in my own body and just the quality of life that I get. So people talk about living well so they can have a long life, and that's great, I want that too. But my quality of life right now on a day-to-day basis is so high, I just want to share that with other people and make sure other people have the information. There is so much misinformation around diabetes, and to hear people, the number of times I hear people think that they cannot eat fruit because they have diabetes, it drives me nuts. So I'm like, okay, what do I got to do to get this information out there so people can know this is an option?
So I've dedicated my career to saying, wait a minute, we've got knowledge we didn't have then, let's stop this epidemic.
The part of the value of science is to redefine what's possible and thereby give many people new hope and new choices that they didn't have before, to say, look, if you're willing to make these changes, this is what, you know, not everything is meaningful is measurable, but a lot of things are, you know, and in every way we can measure, you get better and you feel better and you do it very quickly, and what you gain is so much more than what you give up. Then people are often willing to make those, to at least begin that process. Maybe watching this video may inspire some people to begin that process, and then it comes out of your own experience because you start to feel so much better so quickly.
We're going to leave some experiences behind, and we're going to open up a world where things are in much better, healthy, natural balance, and you just have a better life.
We teach people, you're important. Your problems are important. You getting well is important to you, your family, your community. So that's our goal.
You absolutely stick with the hard science. You avoid any suggestion of hype or snake oil. Stick with the science, because remember this, as a Nobel Prize winner has said, in science we propose a theory, okay? Then what you do the experiment, and it is either right or wrong. Doesn't depend on the ego of the investigator, doesn't depend on the amount of money involved. It's either right or wrong. And that's what we'll stick with.
Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the senator, once said, to paraphrase, you know, we can all have our own opinions, but we can't have our own facts. And so, you know, I view my role as just to share the facts and hope that everyone comes around to the right opinion.
Share the facts and hope everyone comes around to the right opinion. That is exactly what I was determined to do with this docuseries. A few weeks after the July 4th celebration, I was on the beach enjoying the warmth of the late afternoon sun reflecting off the water, considering the effort and risk of producing this documentary. Off to my left, down by the shoreline, there was a young family with 3 girls, about 10 to 12 years old, and they were playing around, chasing each other, laughing, splashing in the ocean. 2 of them were slim, but their sister was overweight, very, very overweight. In that moment, I was projected back into my childhood and how horrible fat kids were treated and bullied. I thought, if in doing this documentary it inspired one family to make a change that resulted in one person not enduring the pain of an obese childhood and avoid all the complications that would develop throughout their adulthood, then any risk I took would be worth it. I've already lived a good life. I need to leave something good behind, and this documentary is it.
Heart disease is actually the #1 killer of diabetics. In fact, if you look at the chances of someone with advanced diabetes going on to dialysis, where their kidneys shut down and have to go on dialysis, the number is surprisingly small. And you say, whew, that's good news. I don't want to go on dialysis. You know, my chances are, you know why your chances are small? Because you're going to be dead. That's because so few diabetics actually live long enough to have their kidneys fail because their heart goes first. #1 killer. In fact, diabetics, your heart disease risk is as high as people who've already had a heart attack, right? I mean, so the people at the highest risk are people that already had it and thankfully lived through it, but obviously they're high risk for heart disease. They have 100% risk. They have heart disease. They just suffered a heart attack, thankfully, and so you know their arteries are clogged and crippled and, you know, inflamed. And So you can't be at higher risk in that. And so then you're interested in what's called secondary prevention, not primary prevention. You already have the disease. Now we're just trying to prevent some of the consequences. Well, a diabetic, even with no history of heart disease, has no idea they have heart disease, they are at as high risk as someone who's already had a heart attack in terms of heart disease. #1 killer of men and women.
People have strokes much earlier than they should have. But even a stroke doesn't have to be a big stroke, like you think of when grandma had a stroke and she couldn't walk anymore. There's where you can have mini strokes, things that affect the brain, small death, where you can't focus anymore.
But you know to me, the scariest complication of diabetes, I always used to think it was a heart attack or stroke, but really the scariest complication is what we now are referring to as type 3 diabetes, or what we're also referring to as insulin resistance of the brain.
Usually we are not scared of any pandemic unless we are affected or our family is affected. So sometimes we tend to think, well, this really isn't affecting my life. Other people get obese and get diabetes. But then when your family is at risk, and when I diagnosed my mother with diabetes, I realized, well, this is really personal now. This is not only about reading about diabetes and obesity pandemic. Now it becomes really personal. Now it becomes really, what can we do to reverse my mother's diabetes? What's the best way, how to do it? And also how to protect myself, my sister, all of us who are at high risk of getting diabetes. So it's really life-saving information. The worst part about life with diabetes is not about high blood sugar itself. It's about the risk of the complications that are related to diabetes, especially kidney disease, blindness or problems with vision, and also accelerated cardiovascular risk. That means the normal atherosclerosis process is very accelerated in people with diabetes, which means that you have a much higher risk of getting heart disease than people without diabetes. And so it's not only about the quality of life affected by diabetes itself, about having to measure your blood pressure, which might be painful, sticking your finger several times a day. Neuropathy is one of the complications of diabetes. There's peripheral neuropathy and also autonomic neuropathy. Both of them are very serious. If you get peripheral neuropathy, it means that the blood supply to your nerves is impaired and your nerves don't proper as well as they used to. And it starts usually at your feet. They are less sensitive and you can even hurt yourself, you don't even know about it, and you can discover several days later when the wound is really infected. So this can be really dangerous and even life-threatening. The autonomic neuropathy is also dangerous because it affects your heart rate. There's regulation on digestion. It's very complex and affects really every organ in your body. Patients with type 2 diabetes also have a high risk of Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is often called type 3 diabetes. So there's a lot of links with diabetes. There's the metabolic regulation affects our risk of getting Alzheimer's disease, especially cholesterol and saturated fat intake increases our risk of getting Alzheimer's disease in later decades of our life.
Yeah, it's really a sad thing that when I think back to when I was growing up, it was, unusual to have an overweight person in class. You know, it was, you know, it's horrible. We would say it's the fat kid in class or whatever. And when you think back about it, it was horrible the way we talked about people then. And that's one thing that's good about society today. We're a little bit more accepting of variations in body size. But what's sad is with that acceptance has come a complacency to the dangers involved with it. You know, so you look at an elementary school today in a classroom, and you're going to find a larger proportion. It's not just one or two. You're going to see a number of kids that are heavy, an alarming number. And then if you look at the classrooms from the elementary school to middle school to high school, the number goes like this. And in fact, when you divide obesity, which is a medical term, into its subtypes of obesity, there's different classes, class 1, 2, 3, etc. And the higher ones we used to call morbid obesity, now we call it severe obesity, which carries with it the greatest amount of risk. You rarely saw a severe obese adolescent in the olden days. What's really scary is the American public at large, the adult population, the rates are somewhere around 6 to 7%, somewhere around in there, of our severe obese. But if you look at our adolescents today, those that are in high school, we have obesity rates that are running now almost double that, like 10%, maybe even higher in some areas, which is really scary because there are very few of us who get smaller as the years go on. We tend to get heavier. So you think about a population that's almost double what our US population of severe obesity is. That's our teenagers. What's going to happen when they're 20? What's going to happen when they're 30? In fact, our pediatric specialists are looking at this and they're warning us. They're saying, look, this generation today that's growing up in our elementary, middle school, and high school will probably be the first generation that will not outlive their parents in terms of longevity. Think about that for a second. We've got all these medical advances. We have all of this that has brought into an expectation that we live longer and longer, and we have. You look at life expectancy for America, it's gotten longer and longer each generation. But the specialists are looking at it now and saying, this is going to be the first generation that's not going to have this life expectancy of their parents. It's going to be a lower life expectancy, which is really sad. And the attitudes, no one realizes the danger. You know, so much of it is cultural. And I'm not talking about just ethnic culture. I'm just talking about our American culture today. Ethnicity does play a role. I remember very well a family that was in my office. 3 generations were sitting in my office. The patient was a little 8, 9, or 10-year-old young man, his mother, and the grandmother. And the grandmother was getting very agitated as I was talking about this young man's weight and why we may want to, you know, not start pushing panic buttons or make him ashamed of what his weight is, or, you know, any of those things, shame him, but that we needed to talk about growing into his weight rather than continuing where he was. Let his height grow without the scale growing anymore for a bit. Trying to be very gentle, but the grandmother was getting very agitated. And lo and behold, I find out that she was very angry because in her mind he was healthy. And that was just part of the cultural expectation in that community that this young man was growing up in. And she didn't understand that the implications of where he was headed had huge ramifications for his health for the future.
Very quickly, I was incredibly uncomfortable in this cumbersome body that felt too big. And that started a long journey through my 20s of trying every way imaginable to lose weight. I mean, at that point, I was working the 12 steps and I was succeeding now in other areas of my life. I went to community college, got my high school equivalency test, and then I transferred to UC Berkeley and got 4.0s there and was the student keynote speaker at the graduation and got a free ride to get my PhD in brain and cognitive sciences at one of the best schools in the world. And that all was going great. And meanwhile, in this secret life I had, I was binging, I was purging, I was going through the garbage can for food. My weight was climbing. By my mid to late 20s, I was obese officially. I didn't actually know that. Nobody comes to your door and gives you a certificate when you cross the line into obesity, but I was obese. I know now because I know what I weighed. And I was increasingly depressed. Clinical depression was part and parcel of my obesity. I couldn't get out of bed. I would sleep until 2, 3, 4 in the afternoon. The dishes would pile up, the laundry would pile up.
I can tell you from personal experience, I know exactly what she's talking about. I could get like a bear going into a cave, lock myself in and just watch movies and eat sleep to numb out the pain. Remember I told you earlier about that day when I was at the beach planning this documentary? That evening, my friends, family, and I built a bonfire, and sometime during the night I was sitting down enjoying it, holding my feet up towards the bonfire to warm up. When I got home in the light of my porch light, I noticed my sandals were soaked with blood. I had burnt my feet in the bonfire like marshmallows and never even felt it. That's neuropathy for you. At least I didn't feel anything when I cleaned all the sand out of the bloody raw flesh in the bathtub. Typical guy. I just bandaged them up, went to bed, and went to the emergency room the next day. The next day they looked even worse. Advanced second and beginning third degree burns across the bottoms of my toes of both feet. Burnt through the epidermis, dermis, and subcutaneous tissue. It was truly sobering. I felt numb, almost in some kind of shock. I burned my feet in a fire and didn't even feel it. And as a diabetic, my immune system is depressed, so healing is going to be a real problem. So is walking around. Like walking around traveling to film a documentary. My doctor said, you need to go home, elevate your feet, and stay off them as much as possible for 2 months. I thought of the little obese girl on the beach playing with her sisters. Said to myself, no way. I ignored my doctor's orders, bandaged up my feet the best I could and loaded up on antibiotics, and hoped for the best, to my own peril, as we'll see what happens in the middle of my journey. Let's get back to our experts and make sure we fully understand the seriousness of this pandemic so we are moved to take the right action.
You know, the problem of diabetes and obesity is something that we encounter quite commonly in the disease that I really work on all the time, which is cardiovascular disease and coronary artery heart disease. Most people who have diabetes realize that, or they should realize, that their average life expectancy is roughly about 12 years less than somebody who doesn't have diabetes. What are the side effects? What are the gifts that you get from diabetes? Let's start at the top. Vascular dementia, strokes, blindness, heart disease, kidney failure, amputations. These aren't laughing matters. These are serious complications that diabetes has for these patients.
For men, no one likes to talk about sexual function, yet privately, when you sit down with a doctor, how many men will come in and say, I've never told even my wife this, but you know, I'm having troubles now with performance that I never had before. And what they don't really realize is the problem with erectile function is actually like the canary in the cave. You know, when the canary dies in a cave and the human feels fine, the human knows they need to get out of the cave or do something about, you know, that there's a gas or whatever in that cave. Well, that erectile dysfunction is a warning sign of the circulation not doing well. That's a warning sign.
So neuropathy is, there's several types of neuropathy. The most common type you see is a loss of sensation in the extremities. So the longest nerves, so typically in the feet and then going up, are going to be affected because those are the longest ones. And the reason that you get neuropathy in diabetics, which is again by far and away the most common cause of nerve damage, so the neuropathy tends to go along with the other microvascular diseases, which are the eye disease you see in diabetes and the kidney disease you see in diabetes. Fatty liver was a disease that essentially did not exist. Nobody really knew about it in the 1980s. It was only described in the late 70s, 80s. And now it's going to be the most common cause of liver disease overall, excluding, say, alcohol in certain parts of the world, and certainly in North America, one of the leading causes of liver failure. So not only is diabetes causing heart failure, kidney failure, strokes, cancer, but it's also the leading cause of liver failure in North America. So really important problems. And Alzheimer's is a very, very interesting disease, and it's caused by these excess plaques and tangles. So this sort of excess protein that's sort of gumming up the brain and causing these failure of memory and so on. And it's one of these diseases that has been recognized very recently as also a metabolic problem. In fact, there's a lot of people that say it should be called type 3 diabetes, for example, just because it is so closely tied into the type 2 diabetes. Yeah, erectile dysfunction is very common in type 2 diabetics as well, and again, it's a problem of blood flow predominantly. So one of the things that we find in type 2 diabetes is that the blood vessels basically get clotted off, or not clotted off, but they kind of get narrowed. There's this process called atherosclerosis, which has also been called hardening of the arteries. So it happens in the big blood vessels, so the arteries of the heart, of the legs, of the brain. Those are the big blood vessels. You get these sort of atheroma plaques, and then they narrow. And if it blocks off, then you get a heart attack or a stroke, or you get gangrene of your legs. The same process also happens in the smaller blood vessels. So in the eyes, in the kidneys, in the nerves, and in the penis, for example, you have smaller blood vessels, but those can also get hardened, and therefore the blood does not flow properly, and then you get the kidney disease, the blindness, the nerve problems, but also the erectile dysfunction.
Like I told you at the beginning, I'm a shareholder in Pfizer, makers of the little blue pill. This is serious, and we need to understand what we don't understand. And I need to meet more of these survivors like Deborah, Elizabeth, and Robbie. What if I can help impact the life of even one child like the little girl on the beach? Do the docuseries or die trying. Let's take an object lesson from the story of Michael as Dr. Kuninobu walks us through the decisions made over a lifetime that take us down a road of the standard American life. The standard American.
Yeah, so let's talk about, kids that are overweight and how they may not, well, I should say their family may not realize why this should be a concern. It's good that we don't judge people by their weight, their value. A child should never be shamed, for whatever body they have. Obviously. But having said that, when you have this trend where somebody is a little bit overweight, and then they just continue on this where they're just not a little overweight, but they're actually unhealthfully overweight as a preteen and a teenager, there's going to be some ramifications at that age. They may not have diabetes yet. They may not even be pre-diabetic yet per se. But there are ramifications. One, we know in studies that they're less likely to finish school. Their grades aren't as good. They have a harder time in general. Now you can have your kid that's smart, that's fine. But we're talking about population studies. You actually will see that there's percentage-wise, fewer are going to finish. Fewer are going to do well or go on to college or finish as many years. And startling study, they found that for young men who are actually obese, 10% less likely to marry. Now, most kids want to get married and have a family. Do they realize that that could actually affect something like that in their life? 10% less likely? Guess what? For ladies, for a teenage girl, 20% less likely to marry. I don't remember the percentage, higher likelihood of poverty throughout her lifetime. So there's socioeconomic impacts that go beyond just our physical. So mom, dad, you know, if you have your child and you're thinking, no big deal, you know, before we even talk about medical, there's socioeconomic, like I've just mentioned. But let's talk about some of those medical things. You know, the first thing that most kids are going to notice is that they can't keep up with others when they go, like a group going hiking, or a group that wants to go paddle boarding, or, you know, they go to a ball game and everyone goes up the stairs and they're huffing and puffing and sweating and they don't feel good, you know, and everybody else is sitting down enjoying the ball game and they're still trying to recover from just coming up the stairs. You know, that's the first thing that people are going to notice, their fitness level, and it doesn't encourage them to stay active and be physically fit. So they're setting the foundation right then and there for less activity and a less of an interest in health. And it starts to snowball from there. Who should we call this guy that we're talking about? Let's give him a name, yeah. Let's call him Michael, yeah. So Michael, you know, is going along through his years. So now he's 30. He's missed out on that promotion. Let's say he's fortunate, though. He found this wonderful woman who didn't care that he was a little overweight, and he got married. But let's really be honest. You know, if Michael's kind of running his life, not worried about his weight, most likely his wife isn't too concerned either about it. What's the likelihood of their kids then being heavy? If one parent, let's say his wife is concerned, or genetically gifted that she's skinny and he just carries extra weight, having one parent increases the kid's likelihood of being obese, probably 3 or 4-fold. That's huge. But you know what? If mom is also obese, let's say she wasn't genetically gifted, or let's say she is like the average mom and dad together are obese 15 times.
Kid doesn't have a chance.
No, I mean, the kid doesn't have a chance. Really, I mean, unless it's a really unusual kid. 15 times more likely that kid's going to end up being obese. So you see that generationally, what's been happening in America. We see that. This shouldn't be as much of an eye-opener as it is, but the lights kind of come on. We go, well, yeah, I guess when you look around, each generation's got heavier and heavier. Yeah, I mean, I guess the lights go on, we go, yeah. But that's what the studies are showing, yeah, those kinds of horrible numbers. So Michael's living his life. He's doing the best he can. He's not making as much as he would like, maybe because he missed out on a promotion, maybe because he doesn't have the energy, maybe because of built-in biases, we don't know. He starts to have to make more visits to the doctor because he doesn't feel as good as he would like. You know, let's say that because of his weight, he gets motivated every January, you know, New Year's resolution time, and he decides he's going to try and really work out, but, you know, he does too much. He's not used to that activity, so he hurts. Let's say he actually injures himself, you know, and now he's got this knee that hurts all the time at 35. And the doctor looks at it and says, yeah, you strained your knee. You know, it's not bad enough that we can do anything for it. It's certainly not a surgical problem. We can't do anything for you. We're sorry. But, you know, so he gets some anti-inflammatory medicine. Helps him so he can at least get to work and get through the day of the job. And but he's got a few more sick leave days now. You know, Not really winning any favors at work any further here, but he's not a bad guy. He's trying as hard as he can, you know. But he's now getting into his 40s, and Doc's saying, hey, Michael, you need some medicine for your blood pressure because it's a little too high. And I hate to tell you this, but your blood sugar that, you know, was normal before, you actually look like you were heading towards diabetes. You really need to do something about it. You know, try to lose some weight. Okay, well, Doc, I really tried. That's why I injured my knee a couple of years ago, because I tried to go to the gym and work out. Yeah, I know you tried, but just try a little harder because you're headed in the wrong direction. So Michael tries to be a good guy. He takes his blood pressure medicine, gets it under control. He, you know, he tries to eat a little less sugar, you know. So, you know, he and his wife try not to have dessert every night, you know. But, you know, they don't understand that the sugar is only treating the symptom of diabetes. He's not treating the underlying problem, you know. He's reading about you know, I've got to stop the sugar, so that's what I'm doing because I have a sugar problem. So he stops cutting the carbs, starts cutting the carbs, starts cutting the sugar, and maybe starves himself a little bit. Maybe he and his wife get on this diet, they do work on it together. They starve themselves for a few weeks and they actually lose some weight and they're feeling pretty good about themselves. But like a lot of people, they can't sustain it. You know, anniversary comes around, birthday comes around, blows up the diet, they get a little discouraged. Usually it's the wife that gets even more discouraged than the guy. Emotionally really hits her hard. Guys get angry, girls get sad. So boom, they get off of what they were doing and they gain weight back really fast. Bad thing is that this is what many Americans go through, is this yo-yo thing. Up and down, up and down. And the bad thing is when they go into starvation, they lose a lot of their lean muscle mass. When they gain it back, they usually gain it as fat. So their body composition is worsening. Their lean body mass, their muscle mass is getting less, their fat is getting more. And that's going to really affect the acceleration of this metabolic syndrome even worse. And it just accelerates them to the point where now Michael's on 2 medicines for his blood pressure, and now he's being told he actually has diabetes. And he's got to start his medicine for diabetes. And he's starting to notice that every now and then when he gets really excited with stress at work, he gets kind of short of breath, or if he has to do something, and he's starting to notice things that he doesn't realize is the beginning of heart disease. You know, and he's starting to get some swelling in his legs, and he doesn't know that his kidneys are starting to be affected. You know, and then there are certain nights when it doesn't seem like he's in the mood, and you know, things don't work so well. And then the relationship starts to get stressed because she thinks that he doesn't think that she's attractive anymore. Oh, and it has nothing to do with his love for her. And all of a sudden there's this wedge in their relationship. And it has nothing to do with that. It all goes back to a continuation of just a landslide, an avalanche, if you will, that started so many years ago with just being a little overweight and not thinking there was any harm in that. And before you know it, you think about all those other things. His little bit of knee pain has been now his hips. Everything hurts. He's got arthritis in multiple joints. Because whether or not he knew it, it wasn't just the weight, but obesity changes the actual physiology and causes earlier arthritis even in your hands that has nothing to do with weight, you know. So he's having trouble, you know, in his, let's say he did have a manual job, he's having a hard time with the wrenches if he's a mechanic, or if he's a construction guy, he's having a hard time pulling the trigger on on the nail gun, you know, all of these very practical things in life. And remember, I haven't said anything about having the heart attack yet. I haven't said anything about the stroke. He's still in his 40s, supposedly the prime of his life. Those things are still coming. And unfortunately, then we got Michael in his 50s, where maybe he does have that heart attack. And suddenly his heart, with the heart attack, loses the ability to do things, and he's on disability because he can't do his job. Who wants to hire somebody in their 50s and do job retraining? No one does. Yeah. No one does. I've been kind of giving you a best case and common scenario. I mean, because he was lucky. He got the job, he got the wife, he got the family. You know, he's actually been making it, so to speak, but he's facing some issues. You know, marriage isn't as strong as it could have been. Wife is concerned that he doesn't love her anymore. But yeah, he rolls on into the 50s and he has that heart attack. Let's say best case scenario, I said he survives it, but now he's got some disability. Yeah, first case for many guys is not survival. Majority die of that first heart attack. But let's say he doesn't have that heart attack. Let's say he's lucky and his doctor said, hey Michael, every time you come in I notice you're really sweating. You know, you walked across the parking lot and knew you were coming to see me, so you wanted to impress me that you got some exercise today, so you walked up the stairs to see me. I have people who did that in my office all the time. But you were really puffing and sweating. Have you been feeling okay doing that? You know, you've been feeling sick? Well, you know, quite honestly, yeah, sometimes I get a little nauseated, or I feel my heart kind of just really pounding, or I feel kind of a little tight. So best case scenario here, he tells his doctor that, and his doctor gets him tested, find out that he actually was about to have a heart attack, and they pop him into surgery, and they open him up, throw in some stents or something, and so they've solved his heart disease now.
And he actually feels better for a while.
He does feel better. And yeah, you know, they actually avoided a disaster there. Unfortunately, they didn't change what got him there. So he goes back down the road, and maybe he's getting blood circulation to the heart now, but the circulation elsewhere, even the brain, isn't going so well. So he goes along the way, still doing the best he can to avoid sugar, trying to lose weight. He makes it, let's say he actually, you know, so he makes it in his 60s because he kept his job. He was off for a few weeks because of the procedure to get his heart circulation going again. But he starts, you know, making a lot of mental errors at work. And boss kind of notes that, talks to him about some of the mistakes he's making, and maybe recommends a job change that doesn't require so much mental effort. So rather than, you know, he's got a really nice boss. You know, rather than getting laid off, which most jobs, you know, employers nowadays would look for a way to lay a guy off, helps him to keep his retirement together, just transfers him to a job that he can do. He gets to 65, retires, finally gets to retirement, looks forward to a wonderful retirement with his wife. You know, looks forward to his kids, who, let's say his eldest is married, and he's looking forward to maybe enjoying some grandkids very soon. And then has a stroke. And as a result of his stroke, is quite disabled, can't do things, maybe even has memory problems, so he can't even remember the celebration with his grandkid, or seeing the graduation of his first grandchild from 8th grade, you know, or has that second heart attack that he doesn't survive and never gets to enjoy that retirement, never makes it to Cabo San Lucas with his wife that he always dreamed about because he couldn't travel. I mean, this is not fictitious. This is actually one of the better case scenarios out there, you know, because Michael he made it to that point. Most people with diabetes, hypertension, The majority aren't even living a fruitful life to that point, rarely to 70s. So for every Michael that we've talked about, there are untold numbers that didn't get to even have as fruitful a life as he did, because they never made it to that point. And the tragic thing is that we now know that we can prevent the vast, vast majority of these. Depending upon which study you look at, 80, 90% or more. And we aren't even touching the other stuff, like cancer, which is a whole nother. We're just talking about Michael and obesity and diabetes and all the ramifications involved with that. By the way, obesity is an independent risk factor for cancer too. We didn't even go there. Yeah. You're Michael. Yeah. First of all, you are so fortunate to live when you do. You may not be feeling fortunate sitting where you are right now, but just think about the fact that we know stuff today that we didn't know before. Some of the data was out there. We're not going to start pointing fingers and why we didn't know it, but number one, you have a way to change your life. It's in your power and your control. And you're not alone. There are many who have gone before you. You have a opportunity to tap into resources, people, stories, and most importantly, recipes that weren't there before. Where the rubber meets the road. None of us are going to stick with something that's miserable. But the very fact that you have hope for a life that's not miserable, it's actually fun.
And so this is the background to why we have got a massive crisis and why we've got an out-of-control pandemic of type 2 diabetes.
Here's the wonderful news. However much you have suffered to this point, and however badly you may have eaten, however much you may not have practiced what we're learning in this series, that is how much you have to gain with a change. So if you're suffering right now, if you're hurting right now, if you have excess weight right now that you're dealing with, then you have the most to gain from what we're learning right here in this series. You have the most to gain because your body can be flooded with the nutrients that it's been craving for so long. And your body can release the weight and the misery and the aches and pains that have been weighing you down for so long that you just thought this was how life had to be. It's not how life has to be. Now, there's a big difference between hope and change. Hope is the belief that things can get better. Change is actually making them better. Hope is going by the gym and saying, oh gosh, I could join that gym someday. Change is going to the gym and working out. Hope is looking at that donut and saying, gosh, I could stop eating donuts. Change is not buying the donut in the first place, right? But here's the thing. You will never get change without hope. If you don't believe it's possible, then it's not. So that spark of possibility that says, I could make a change, I could stop the donuts, I could go to the gym, is a seed. Not all seeds sprout into trees, but when we water them, when we nurture them, when we apply them, then your seed of hope becomes a change in your life. It becomes a force of nature that becomes unstoppable. That's what I want for you. My great uncle died at the age of 54. He was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in American history. He had incredible wealth. He had a business he loved. He had a family he loved. But he didn't have his health. And then he didn't have his life. And he left his kids fatherless and his wife a widow. I never even knew him. I just know about him from the family stories. My grandpa was on a similar path. He was in his early 70s and he was pretty much on death's door. And thank God he had the courage to make a change.
I want to thrive, not just survive. Don't you? Don't you want your family and friends to as well? I want you to know that hope is on the way. Wait until you see episodes 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Before we go, though, I want you to think about that one person in your life that may not have hope, may be isolated, may be depressed, maybe they're overweight and feel shame. I know what that's like. I've been there before myself. I'm still struggling with it. I remember it was my buddy who kept reaching up to me and saying, "John, how you doing? Are you okay?" Encouraging me to keep moving toward health and thriving. If it wasn't for my buddy, I don't even know if I'd be here right now. And so as we close today's episode, I just want you to think about who is that one person in your life that may be isolated themselves, may not have anyone knocking on their door, thinking about them. And I just invite you to be their buddy. Reach out to them and share this docuseries with them, because this docuseries is all about going on this journey together. I invite you to come on this journey and find hope and change for us and the ones we love. Let's get to the bottom of things. Let's discover how we can rise from the depths of diabetes and obesity forever together. Did you enjoy the first episode? I hope so. If you're one of the people watching iThrive for the first time, especially if this is your first episode, you might be wondering, who's this enormous, sick-looking guy obviously drowning in diabetes and obesity? And who's he to tell me anything? You know, it looks like he's not even going to make it. Well, I just want to let you know I did it. And trust me, I'm a worst case scenario. As food addicted as I was, as depressed as I was, I did it. And if I did it, anyone can do it. You know, Ocean Robbins' great uncle, co-founder of Baskin-Robbins Ice Cream, he died at 54. I'm 54. I should be dead. I'm not. No way. You know, but Ocean's dad saved himself. He changed right on death's door, and I changed too. Don't wait another day. Become unstoppable. Look, you're going to hear me say this over and over. If I did it, you can do it. We can do it together. And as Ocean said, it starts with inspiration. That inspiration waters a seed of hope for change. But you got to take action, and that'll make that seed sprout into a force of nature. I invite you to be a force of nature. I want you to know there's a whole iThrive community of thousands of people out there that are on this journey together, supporting each other. And I invite you to be a part of it. Whether you choose to own the series or not, keep watching and share it with someone you care about that really needs it. Help get this message of inspiration and hope out there. Let people in your life know that it's really possible to reverse diabetes and obesity and thrive again. Okay, watch for my next email with a link to episode 2. Good night.